What would you do if you discovered that a child's entire reality was a carefully constructed lie? When Marian Foster walked through the doors of the Hartman Mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut, she expected to care for a blind 8-year-old girl. What she found instead was a secret so devastating it would shatter everything she thought she knew about protection, love, and the lengths a parent will go to bury the past. In that house of locked doors and drawn curtains, where silence pressed down like a physical weight, a little girl named Evelyn lived in permanent darkness. Not because she couldn't see, but because someone needed her to believe she couldn't. This is the story of what happens when one woman decides that some truths are worth any cost to uncover. A story about a billionaire's guilt, a mother's psychosis, and a child caught between the two. About the moment when Marian noticed something impossible, a flicker of response to light from eyes that should have seen nothing, and chose to keep looking when everyone else had looked away. What she discovered behind those locked doors would reveal a conspiracy of fear, a murder covered up, and a love so twisted it became indistinguishable from cruelty. Before this story ends, you'll question everything you thought you knew about sacrifice and salvation. You'll witness the thin line between protection and imprisonment. And you'll understand why sometimes the cruelest darkness isn't the absence of light, but the presence of someone who forces you to live as if that light doesn't exist. This is a story that will stay with you long after the final word, because it asks a question none of us want to answer. How far would you go to protect someone you love? And at what point does protection become the very thing you should be protecting them from? If you're ready to uncover the truth about what really happened in the Hartman Mansion, subscribe to our channel, leave a like, and comment below where you're watching from. This story demands to be heard, and I promise you won't be able to stop until you know how it ends. The Hartman estate sat like a mausoleum at the edge of Greenwich, Connecticut, all limestone and silence, surrounded by manicured hedges that seemed designed to keep the world out rather than beauty in. Marian Foster had driven past homes like this 1,000 times in her 28 years, always from the outside looking in, always wondering what kind of lives unfolded behind those towering iron gates. Now, on this cold November morning, she was about to find out. Her Honda Civic looked almost apologetic parked in the circular driveway, dwarfed by the mansion's stone columns and the Mercedes sedan gleaming nearby. Marian clutched her purse, containing little more than her expired nursing certification, a photo of her late mother, and $43, and tried to steady her breathing. She needed this job, needed it with a desperation that made her stomach twist. 3 months of unemployment, eviction notices piling up, student loans screaming for payment. When the agency called about a live-in position caring for a disabled child, she'd said yes before hearing the salary. The number they quoted afterward had nearly made her drop the phone. $2,500 per week. Something was wrong with that number. Nobody paid that much for basic childcare, not even billionaires. But Marian had learned long ago that survival meant swallowing questions and moving forward. Helen, the head housekeeper, answered the door, a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair, pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her face into permanent disapproval. Her eyes swept over Marian with the kind of assessment usually reserved for produce at the grocery store. "You're the new girl," Helen said. "Not a question. Follow me. Mr. Hartman is very particular about his schedule. You have exactly 3 minutes." The interior of the house was colder than the November air outside. Everything was white marble floors, white walls, white furniture that looked like it had never been sat on. The only color came from a massive abstract painting in the foyer, all black slashes across a pale canvas. It looked like violence trying to escape. Marian's footsteps echoed as she followed Helen down a corridor that seemed to stretch forever. Closed doors lined both sides. No family photos. No children's artwork stuck to refrigerators. No signs of life at all, really, except for the faint smell of lemon polish and something else, something medicinal that made Marian's old nursing instincts prickle. Richard Hartman's study was exactly what she expected. Dark wood, leather chairs, walls lined with books that looked untouched. The man himself stood behind a desk the size of her old apartment's living room, signing documents without looking up. He was younger than she'd imagined, maybe late 40s, with the kind of harsh handsomeness that came from good genes and expensive grooming. His suit probably cost more than her car. "Miss Foster." He still didn't look at her. "Your background check came back clean. Limited experience, but the agency assures me you're adequate." The word stung, but Marian kept her face neutral. "Adequate? Just adequate enough to accept whatever was happening in this house. My daughter Evelyn is 8 years old," Richard continued, finally meeting her eyes. His were gray, flat, like stones at the bottom of a river. She was born completely blind. Retinopathy of prematurity, complicated by several other factors the doctors used many words to describe. What matters is this: she cannot see. She will never see. She requires care, supervision, and most importantly, she requires consistency and routine. He slid a typed document across the desk. These are the rules. You will read them. You will memorize them. You will follow them exactly. Marianne picked up the paper. Her hands trembled slightly, though she tried to hide it. Rule 1. No bright lights or sudden illumination near Evelyn. Keep environments consistently dim. Rule 2. No taking Evelyn outside without express written permission. Rule 3. No visitors. No phone calls regarding Evelyn to anyone outside this household. Rule 4. Minimal emotional attachment. You are staff, not family. Rule 5. No questions about Evelyn's mother. This topic is forbidden. Rule 6. Any breach of these rules results in immediate termination without reference. The list went on. 15 rules in total, each one tightening like a noose around something Marianne couldn't quite name. Do you understand? Richard asked. Yes, sir. But I have to ask, why no bright lights? If she's blind, wouldn't. Rule 7, Miss Foster. No questions about medical decisions. I pay doctors a great deal of money for their expertise. I don't require yours. His voice dropped to something dangerous. My daughter has been through enough. The last thing she needs is another person trying to help by doing things their own way. The previous caregiver didn't understand that. She's no longer with us. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Marianne nodded, her mouth dry. I understand. Good. Helen will show you to Evelyn's room. You start immediately. The dismissal was clear. As Marianne turned to leave, Richard spoke again, softer now but somehow more unsettling. My daughter is fragile, Miss Foster. This house is her protection from a world that would never understand her. Remember that. Helen led her up a grand staircase to the second floor, down another endless hallway. The doors here were closed too, except for one at the very end. As they approached, Marianne heard something that made her heart crack, a small voice singing. A child's voice, thin and uncertain, singing a melody Marianne didn't recognize. That's her room, Helen said. She sings to herself. Doesn't speak much otherwise. The housekeeper's expression was unreadable. I've been here since Evelyn was born. Watched 3 caregivers come and go. You seem nice enough, dear. My advice? Do exactly what Mr. Hartmann says, and don't get curious. This is a good job with good pay. Don't ruin it by caring too much. With that, Helen left her standing in the doorway. Marianne knocked softly. Evelyn? My name is Marianne. I'm going to be taking care of you now. May I come in? The singing stopped. After a long moment, a small voice answered. Okay. The room was dim, just as Richard had specified. Heavy curtains blocked most of the daylight, leaving only a soft glow from a lamp in the corner. It took Marianne's eyes a moment to adjust. Evelyn sat on the edge of her bed, a small figure in a white dress that made her look even more ghostly. Her hair was dark, hanging straight and shining like it had been brushed 1,000 times. Her eyes were closed, and she held her hands folded in her lap with an unnatural stillness for an 8-year-old. Hi, Evelyn, Marianne said gently, moving into the room. I'm really happy to meet you. Are you going to stay? The girl's voice was barely above a whisper. I'm going to try my very best to stay. Would you like that? Evelyn didn't answer. Her head tilted slightly, tracking Marianne's movement through the room with a precision that seemed almost, no. That was impossible. Marianne approached the bed slowly. I thought maybe we could get to know each other. Would you like to tell me about yourself? There's nothing to tell. I can't see. I stay in my room. That's all. The flatness in that small voice was wrong. Children weren't supposed to sound like that, hollow, resigned, like prisoners reciting their sentences. Marianne sat down in the chair near the bed, trying to keep her tone light. Well, I bet there's more to you than that. Do you like stories? Music? I used to love to. She'd pulled out her phone to check the time, and the screen flashed bright as it came to life. It was purely accidental, barely a second of illumination in the dim room. But Evelyn's head snapped toward it. Not gradually, not vaguely in that direction. Snapped, fast, precise, like a person who had seen exactly where the light came from. Then, just as quickly, the girl turned away, her small shoulders hunching as if trying to make herself disappear. Marianne's breath caught in her throat. Every instinct from her nursing training screamed at once. That wasn't how blind people reacted to light. They couldn't react to light they couldn't see. They might respond to sound, to air movement, but not to a visual stimulus they had no way of perceiving. She watched Evelyn carefully now, her mind racing. The girl sat frozen, her hands gripping the edge of her dress. She was trembling. "Evelyn," Marianne said softly. "Sweetheart, are you okay?" "I'm fine. I don't like loud noises. Your phone probably made a sound. I have good hearing." But it hadn't made a sound. Marianne had it on silent mode. The girl was lying. A child was lying about being blind, and her hands were shaking with fear. Marianne felt ice slide down her spine. She looked around the room with new eyes, at the covered windows, the dim light, the lack of toys or colors or anything a child might enjoy. At the small speaker near the bed playing white noise. At the lock on the outside of the door she'd noticed on the way in. This wasn't a sanctuary. This was a prison. "Evelyn," she said, keeping her voice gentle even as her heart pounded. "I want you to know something. I'm here to help you, whatever you need. You can trust me." The girl's lips pressed together. For a moment, Marianne thought she might speak, might say whatever truth was burning behind those closed eyes. But then Evelyn simply lay back on her bed, turning to face the wall. "I'm tired. Can you turn off the lamp, please?" Marianne stood and crossed to the small table lamp, her mind spinning. As she reached for the switch, she made a decision. She needed to test something. She flicked the light off, then on again briefly before turning it off completely. Just a quick flash. Evelyn flinched. Marianne saw it clearly, saw the girl's shoulders tense at the exact moment the light came back on, even though she was facing away, even though her eyes were closed. The lamp went dark. The room fell into deeper shadow. Marianne stood there in the darkness, her pulse thundering in her ears. She didn't know what was happening in this house, but every fiber of her being knew one thing with absolute certainty. Evelyn Hartman could see. And someone had taught her to pretend she couldn't. That night, after Helen had shown her to her small room down the hall and left her alone, Marianne couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle and creak around her. Somewhere in the darkness, a child was trapped in a lie so massive it had consumed her entire existence. Around midnight, Marianne heard footsteps in the hallway, soft, barefoot steps. She held her breath, listening. They stopped outside Evelyn's door. Then came the sound of a lock clicking open, then closed again a moment later. The footsteps retreated. Someone was locking Evelyn in at night. Marianne waited until the house was silent again, then crept to her door. The hallway was dark except for a thin line of light under one door near the stairs. Richard's study, perhaps. She moved toward Evelyn's room, her heart hammering. She pressed her ear against the door. Inside, she heard the sound of soft crying, quickly muffled. Then, so quiet she almost missed it, a small voice whispering to itself. "I know there's light here. I know I can see it, but I have to pretend. I have to, because if I don't, he said it will happen again. He said it will all happen again, and it will be my fault." Marianne's hands pressed against the door, tears burning in her eyes. She didn't know what it was. She didn't know what had happened to this child. But she knew, with a clarity that felt like glass breaking, that she was standing on the edge of something terrible. Something that had been hidden in this beautiful house for 8 years. Something that was about to come into the light. Marianne's first full week at the Hartman estate passed like walking through fog. Everything muffled, distorted, wrong in ways she couldn't quite articulate but felt in her bones. She moved through the mansion's sterile hallways with a growing sense of dread, watching Evelyn with the careful attention of someone trying to solve a puzzle where half the pieces had been hidden on purpose. The child was extraordinary at deception. That was the first thing Marianne realized, and it broke her heart into smaller pieces each day. Evelyn had perfected the performance of blindness with the dedication of a method actor. Her movements slow and cautious, her hands reaching out tentatively before her, her head tilting in that particular way sighted people imagine blind people move. But there were cracks in the performance, hairline fractures that only appeared when Evelyn thought no one was watching. On Tuesday morning, Marianne had been folding laundry in the corner of Evelyn's room, deliberately keeping silent to observe. A shaft of sunlight had broken through a gap in the heavy curtains, just a thin blade of gold cutting across the Persian rug. Evelyn had been sitting on the floor, supposedly feeling the textures of different fabrics as part of her sensory development routine, another rule from Richard's endless list. But when that sunbeam appeared, the girl had shifted her position ever so slightly, moving her hand out of the light's path with a precision that made Marianne's throat tighten. You couldn't avoid what you couldn't see. Then there were the toys. Evelyn's room was filled with them, expensive, therapeutic toys designed for blind children. Textured blocks, musical instruments, puzzles with raised surfaces. But they all looked brand new, untouched, arranged on shelves like museum pieces. The only thing that showed anywhere was a small stuffed rabbit, its fur matted from being held, one ear slightly torn. Marianne had watched Evelyn reach for it one afternoon, her hand going directly to its location on the nightstand without any of the searching, patting movements that should have preceded it. The girl knew exactly where everything was, because she could see it. But the most disturbing observation came on Thursday, during what Helen called movement therapy. Marianne was supposed to guide Evelyn through the mansion's corridors, helping her build spatial awareness and confidence. They'd been walking down the second-floor hallway when a door suddenly opened ahead of them, one of the mysterious rooms Marianne hadn't been allowed to enter. A draft swept through, and a framed photograph on a side table tilted precariously, about to fall. Evelyn's hand shot out and caught it. Not approximately. Not in the general direction with a lucky grab. She caught it precisely, her fingers closing around the frame at the exact moment it would have crashed to the floor. Then, realizing what she'd done, the girl's face had drained of all color. Her whole body had started shaking, and she dropped the frame anyway, letting it clatter to the marble floor where the glass shattered. "I heard it falling," Evelyn had whispered, her voice thin with panic. I heard where it was. But sound doesn't tell you exactly where to position your fingers. Sound doesn't give you that kind of spatial precision." Marianne had cleaned up the glass while Evelyn stood frozen, and neither of them had mentioned it again. But that night, lying in her narrow bed in the staff quarters, Marianne had stared at the ceiling and felt the weight of what she was witnessing. This wasn't just a family secret. This was systematic, deliberate, cruel. Someone had trained this child to deny her own senses, to live in a prison of pretended darkness while her eyes worked perfectly well. The question that haunted Marianne most was the simplest: why? She started investigating in the only ways available to her, small, careful observations that wouldn't raise suspicion. The other staff members were her first target. Besides Helen, there were only 3 others who worked in the house regularly: Marcus, the groundskeeper who rarely came inside, Teresa, who cooked meals Marianne never saw anyone eat together, and young James, a maintenance worker who seemed perpetually nervous, his eyes always darting toward the security cameras mounted in every corner. Teresa was the first one Marianne approached, catching her in the industrial kitchen one morning while preparing breakfast. The cook was a round woman in her 50s with kind eyes and flour permanently dusted on her apron. "How long have you worked here?" Marianne asked casually, helping to chop vegetables for an omelet no one would share. 6 years now," Teresa said, her knife moving with practiced efficiency. "Good pay, quiet work. Mr. Hartman isn't around much, which suits me fine. What about Evelyn? Do you see her often?" Teresa's knife paused for just a fraction of a second. "Poor little thing. Born into all this money and can't even see it. Tragedy, really. But Mr. Hartman takes good care of her. Best doctors, everything she needs. Has she always been so isolated? No friends, no school?" "That's not really my business, dear." Teresa's voice had shifted, becoming carefully neutral. "I make the food. That's what I'm paid for. Everything else in this house is above my pay grade, if you know what I mean." The message was clear: don't ask questions. James was even less helpful, practically fleeing when Marianne tried to start a conversation about the house's history. "I just fix things," he'd muttered, his toolbox clutched like a shield. "I don't know nothing about nothing, and that's how I like it." Only Helen seemed willing to engage, though her answers raised more questions than they resolved. Marianne found her in the laundry room on Friday afternoon, sorting through linens with mechanical precision. The older woman didn't look up when Marianne entered. "You're getting attached to the girl," Helen said. "It wasn't a question." "She's easy to care about," Marianne replied carefully. "She's sweet, gentle. She's also not your concern beyond the duties outlined in your contract." Helen's hands kept moving, folding sheets into perfect rectangles. "I can see it in your face. You think something's wrong here. You think you've noticed things." Marianne's heart hammered. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do." Helen finally looked at her, and her expression was complex, part warning, part sympathy, part something that looked almost like resignation. "You're the 4th caregiver in 3 years, Marianne. Do you know why the others left?" "Mr. Hartman said they didn't follow the rules." "That's one way to put it. Another way is that they started asking questions. Started thinking they knew better than a man who spent millions on his daughter's care. Started imagining problems where there weren't any. Helen's voice dropped lower. And each of them left this house with nothing, no reference, no severance, no way to work in childcare again. Mr. Hartman has powerful attorneys, and even more powerful friends. You understand what I'm saying? You're telling me to stop looking. I'm telling you that some families have complicated situations that outsiders can't possibly understand. I'm telling you that Mr. Hartman loves his daughter in ways that might not look like love to someone who doesn't know the full story. And I'm telling you that the full story isn't yours to know. Helen returned to her folding. You seem like a good person. You need this job. My advice is to do it well and stop searching for problems that don't exist. But they did exist. Marianne knew they existed because she'd seen them, documented them in her mind like the nurse she'd once been trained to be. And that afternoon, she found something that transformed her suspicions into something sharper, more urgent. She'd been cleaning Evelyn's room while the girl napped, or pretended to nap. Marianne could never be quite sure. The massive mahogany armoire in the corner had been bothering her for days. It sat at an odd angle, not quite flush with the wall, leaving a gap of several inches. Marianne had been meaning to push it back into place, but when she finally moved behind it to check, she found something that made her blood run cold. Wedged in the narrow space between the armoire and the wall was a pair of children's sunglasses. They weren't ordinary sunglasses. As Marianne pulled them free, her hands trembling, she realized the lenses had been modified, covered with some kind of translucent material that would severely limit but not completely block vision. Like looking through wax paper, maybe. Like being forced to see the world through a distorted, dimmed filter. The frames were small, sized for a much younger child. Maybe a toddler. And on the inside of one arm, barely visible, someone had scratched a date. March 15th, 2019. Marianne's mind raced through calculations. If Evelyn was 8 now, in 2025, that would have made her 2 years old. 2 years old when someone had put these specialized glasses on her, training her to live in artificial darkness. She heard a small sound and spun around. Evelyn was sitting up in bed, her eyes, those perfectly functional eyes, fixed on the glasses in Marianne's hands. The girl's face had gone white as paper. Where did you find those? Evelyn's voice was barely audible. Bien zu armoire. Evelyn, what are these? Why would someone? Put them back. The panic in the child's voice was visceral, raw. Please put them back. He can't know you found them. He can't know they're still here. I was supposed to forget about them. I was supposed to forget everything from before. Before what, sweetheart? Marianne moved toward the bed, the glasses still in her hand. Before what? Tears were streaming down Evelyn's face now, her small body beginning to shake. Before the accident. Before Mommy died. Before everything became dark and I had to learn to be blind so it wouldn't happen again. The words came out in a rush, like a dam breaking, and Marianne felt the room tilt around her. Evelyn's mother, the topic that was forbidden, the subject that triggered Richard's coldest warnings. What had happened to her? Evelyn, Marianne whispered, kneeling beside the bed. Can you tell me what happened? Can you tell me about your mother? But the girl was shaking her head violently now, her hands pressed over her ears. No. I can't remember. I'm not supposed to remember. Daddy said remembering makes it hurt, makes everything hurt, and if I just stay in the dark and pretend, then maybe she'll come back. Maybe if I'm good enough and blind enough and quiet enough, she'll come back. The logic of a traumatized child, twisted by someone who should have been helping her heal instead of burying her deeper in delusion. Marianne wanted to pull Evelyn into her arms, to promise her safety, to break every rule Richard Hartman had written. But she could hear footsteps in the hallway, heavy, measured footsteps that could only belong to one person. She shoved the glasses back behind the armoire and stepped away just as Richard appeared in the doorway. His eyes moved from Marianne to Evelyn, who had collapsed back onto her pillow, her face turned to the wall, her shoulders still shaking with silent sobs. What happened here? Richard's voice was dangerously quiet. She had a nightmare, Marianne said, surprised by how steady her own voice sounded. She was calling for her mother. I was just comforting her. Richard's jaw tightened. He stared at Marianne for a long moment, and she saw something flicker in his eyes, guilt, perhaps, or fear, or something darker she couldn't name. Then he crossed to Evelyn's bed and did something Marianne hadn't seen before. He touched his daughter's hair just briefly, his hand trembling slightly. No more talk of nightmares, he said softly. No more talk of things that only make the darkness, and Marianne knew with absolute certainty that she couldn't walk away. Not now. Not when she'd seen those glasses. Not when she'd heard Evelyn's small voice break on the word mommy. She would find the truth, whatever it cost her. Because in that moment, looking at the closed door and thinking of the child locked behind it, Marianne Foster made a choice that would change everything. She decided to see what Richard Hartman had spent 8 years trying to hide. The decision to actively investigate came to Marianne at 3 in the morning, in that hollow space between midnight and dawn when the mansion seemed to breathe with a life of its own. She'd been lying awake for hours, staring at the water stain on her ceiling that looked like a spreading bruise, thinking about those modified sunglasses and the way Evelyn had said, before the accident, as if those 3 words contained entire universes of pain. Marianne had never been brave. Growing up in Providence, Rhode Island, the daughter of a single mother who'd worked double shifts at the plastics factory, she'd learned early that keeping your head down was how you survived. Don't ask questions. Don't make waves. Take what you're given and be grateful. That philosophy had carried her through nursing school, through her mother's cancer diagnosis and death, through the collapse of her engagement when her fiancé decided he wanted someone less complicated and sad. She'd become an expert at swallowing her own feelings, at making herself smaller to fit into spaces that didn't want her. But something about Evelyn had cracked that armor. Maybe it was the way the girl held herself so carefully still, like a prisoner who'd learned that any movement might trigger punishment. Maybe it was those moments when Evelyn forgot to perform blindness, and her eyes would track movement with heartbreaking accuracy before she caught herself and looked away. Or maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe Marianne just couldn't stand watching a child suffer anymore, not when she had the power to do something about it. So at 3:15, she made her choice. She would test Evelyn systematically, carefully, building undeniable evidence of what she already knew. And then she would find out what had happened to this family, what had twisted Richard Hartman into a man who would imprison his own daughter in manufactured darkness. The opportunity came that same morning, during what Richard's schedule called tactile learning time. Marianne was supposed to help Evelyn explore different textures and shapes, building her spatial awareness through touch alone. But today, Marianne had other plans. She'd borrowed a small candle from the kitchen, one of the decorative votives Teresa kept in a drawer for power outages. She'd tucked it into her cardigan pocket along with matches, her heart hammering against her ribs like it was trying to escape her chest. Evelyn sat at her usual spot by the window, the heavy curtains drawn as always, creating that perpetual twilight Richard insisted upon. The girl's hands were folded in her lap, her face composed in that unsettling mask of patience that no 8-year-old should have mastered. "Good morning, Evelyn," Marianne said, keeping her voice gentle. "How did you sleep?" "Fine, thank you." The automatic response, polite and empty. "I thought today we might do something a little different. Would that be okay?" A flicker of something crossed Evelyn's face, curiosity, maybe, or fear. "What kind of different?" "Just a new activity. Something fun." Marianne pulled the candle from her pocket, setting it on the small table between them. "I'm going to light this candle, and I want you to tell me what you notice. The smell, the warmth, anything at all." She struck the match, the sound sharp in the quiet room. The flame caught, and warm light bloomed in the dimness. Marianne watched Evelyn's face with the intensity of a scientist observing a critical experiment. For a moment, nothing. Evelyn sat perfectly still, her expression neutral. But then, there, just the tiniest movement. Her pupils contracted. It was reflexive, automatic, the kind of response you can't fake or control. The kind of response that only happens when light hits a functioning retina. Marianne's breath caught. She moved the candle slowly to the left. Evelyn's eyes tracked it, just for a second, before the girl caught herself and turned her face away, her small jaw clenching. "The warmth feels nice," Evelyn said, her voice strained. "And it smells like vanilla? Very good." Marianne kept her tone casual, even as her mind raced. "Now I'm going to move around the room a little. You just stay comfortable." She stood, carrying the candle, and began walking in a circle around Evelyn's chair. Slowly, deliberately, she passed behind the girl, then to her right side, creating shadows that danced across the walls. Evelyn's head turned incrementally, following the light source with precision that couldn't be explained by hearing or sensing warmth. When Marianne passed in front of the window, positioning herself so the candle created a silhouette, Evelyn's hands gripped the arms of her chair. The girl's breathing had changed, becoming shallower, faster. She was trying so hard not to react, not to see what her eyes were clearly seeing. "Evelyn," Marianne said softly, returning to her seat and setting the candle down. "Can I ask you something?" "Okay." The word was barely audible. Why are you afraid right now? The girl's composure shattered. Her lower lip trembled, and tears began sliding down her cheeks. Silent, defeated tears that spoke of exhaustion and loneliness deeper than any child should know. I'm not supposed to see it, she whispered. The light, the shadows. I'm not supposed to see any of it. Marianne felt her own eyes burn. But you do see it, don't you? Evelyn's hands came up to cover her face, and her whole body began to shake with suppressed sobs. Please don't tell him. Please don't tell Daddy. I'm trying so hard to be good, to be blind like he needs me to be. I promise I'm trying. Sweetheart, listen to me. Marianne moved to kneel beside the chair, reaching for Evelyn's hands, but the girl flinched away violently. No, you don't understand. Last time someone noticed, last time someone said I could see, something terrible happened. The doctors came, and there were tests, and everyone was angry and Mommy. Her voice broke completely. I don't remember what happened to Mommy, but I know it's connected. I know that if I just stay blind, if I just pretend hard enough, maybe she'll forgive me for whatever I did wrong. The logic of trauma, Marianne thought with aching sadness. The way children's minds twisted to make sense of adult cruelty and chaos. Evelyn had somehow been convinced that her ability to see was dangerous, that her vision itself had caused catastrophe. You didn't do anything wrong, Marianne said firmly. Whatever happened to your mother, it wasn't your fault. You were just a baby. But the glasses, Evelyn's words tumbled out now, unstoppable. When I was really little, before I can remember much, I had to wear special glasses that made everything blurry and dark. Daddy said they were helping me, protecting me, but they hurt my eyes and made my head feel sick. And then one day they were gone, and Daddy said I had to pretend I couldn't see at all, that it was safer that way, that people would leave us alone if they thought I was blind. Marianne's mind reeled. Someone had deliberately damaged this child's vision during her developmental years, forcing her to wear lenses that would limit and distort her sight. It was abuse, pure and simple, medical abuse, psychological abuse, a systematic destruction of a child's reality. How long have you been pretending? Marianne asked, her voice shaking. I don't know. Forever, I think. Since I was really small. Sometimes I can't remember what's real anymore. Maybe I really am blind, and I just imagine seeing things. Maybe the light is just in my head. Evelyn looked up at Marianne with eyes full of such desperate confusion that Marianne wanted to scream. Am I crazy? Is that why Daddy keeps me locked up? Because I'm crazy like Mommy was? Your mother was crazy? That's what Helen says. She says Mommy got sick in her mind, and that's why she died, and that I might get sick too if I don't follow all the rules exactly. Every word was another piece of a horrifying puzzle. Marianne blew out the candle, the smoke curling up like a ghost between them. Evelyn, I need you to listen very carefully. You're not crazy. Your eyes work. Not perfectly maybe, but they work. Someone taught you to hide that. Someone made you afraid of your own senses. But that doesn't make you wrong or broken or bad. Do you understand? Evelyn searched Marianne's face with an intensity that suggested she was trying to memorize every detail, trying to decide if this adult could be trusted or if this was another trap. If I'm not supposed to be blind, then why does everyone pretend I am? I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out. They'll fire you. They fired Miss Caroline when she asked too many questions, and Miss Beth before her. Daddy always finds out when someone's getting too close. Too close to what? Before Evelyn could answer, they heard the sound that had become Marianne's personal warning signal. Helen's footsteps in the hallway, precise and measured. Both of them froze. Evelyn's face immediately smoothed into that practiced blankness, and she turned her face away from where Marianne sat, resuming her performance of blindness with heartbreaking efficiency. Helen appeared in the doorway, her sharp eyes scanning the room. Had she been listening? The walls in this mansion seemed to have ears, every conversation potentially monitored. Mr. Hartmann requests that Evelyn remain in her room for the rest of the day, Helen announced. He has business associates visiting this afternoon, and he doesn't want any disruptions. Translation: hide the blind daughter away so the guests don't ask uncomfortable questions. Of course, Marianne said evenly. We'll be fine here. Helen's gaze lingered on Marianne for a beat too long. You look flushed, dear. Are you feeling well? This house can be overwhelming for new staff. Several have found they needed to leave for health reasons. The threat wasn't even subtle. Marianne forced a smile. I'm perfectly fine, thank you. When Helen left, Marianne and Evelyn sat in silence for several minutes. Finally, the girl spoke, her voice so quiet Marianne almost missed it. I only make pretend that I don't see, because he said that if I see again, it will happen again. What will happen, sweetheart? I don't know. That's the scary part. I don't remember. But I know it was bad enough that Daddy would rather have a blind daughter than risk me remembering. Marianne felt something cold and heavy settle in her stomach. Whatever had happened in this house, whatever tragedy or crime Richard Hartman was hiding, it was buried so deep that he'd sacrificed his daughter's entire childhood to keep it covered. That afternoon, while Evelyn napped, or pretended to nap, Marianne made a decision that crossed a line she couldn't uncross. She would search Richard's study. It was insane, potentially career-ending, possibly illegal. But she'd already committed herself to this path when she'd lit that candle and watched Evelyn's pupil's contract. She couldn't stop now. She waited until she heard Richard's Mercedes pull out of the driveway, taking him to whatever business meeting he'd claimed justified locking his daughter away. Helen was in the kitchen. Teresa had left for the day. James was somewhere on the grounds, probably avoiding human contact as usual. Marianne's hands shook as she descended the stairs. Every step felt like thunder in the silent house. The study door was closed but not locked. Richard's arrogance assumed no one would dare enter his private space. The room smelled of leather and expensive cologne. Marianne moved quickly to the desk, her heart hammering so hard she felt dizzy. The drawers were locked, but the filing cabinet against the wall wasn't. She pulled it open, revealing rows of folders with neat labels. Financial records, property deeds, investment portfolios. Nothing personal, nothing revealing. Then, in the back of the bottom drawer, she found a folder that made her breath stop. It was labeled simply, YH Medical, Confidential. Her hands trembled as she pulled it out. Inside were medical records, but as Richard had told her before, pages were missing. Torn out roughly, leaving jagged edges. What remained told a fractured story. Birth records showing Evelyn born healthy, with no vision problems noted. Then a gap. Then records from age 2 showing retinopathy treatment and vision correction therapy from a doctor whose name had been blacked out. At the bottom of the folder was a single photograph, partially burned at the edges as if someone had tried to destroy it but stopped. It showed a woman, beautiful, dark-haired, laughing, holding a baby. The woman's eyes were the same shape as Evelyn's. This had to be her mother. Marianne flipped the photo over. On the back, in shaky handwriting, Diana and Evelyn, 2017. Last happy day. Last happy day before what? Marianne heard a car door slam outside, and her blood turned to ice. Richard was back early. She shoved the photo back into the folder back into the drawer, and ran from the study on legs that felt like water. She made it to her room seconds before she heard his footsteps in the hallway below. She pressed her back against the door, gasping, her mind racing with the fragments she'd discovered. Whatever had happened to Diana Hartman, Evelyn's mother, it had happened after that photo was taken. Something that had ended with a dead wife and a daughter forced into blindness. And Marianne had just decided to drag that truth into the light, no matter what it cost. The confrontation came during dinner, or what passed for dinner in the Hartman house, where meals were solitary affairs eaten in designated rooms at designated times, as if the family were guests in a particularly rigid hotel, rather than people who shared blood and history. Marianne had been bringing Evelyn's tray upstairs, grilled chicken, steamed vegetables, everything cut into small pieces, as if the girl couldn't manage a knife and fork, when she found Richard standing in the second-floor hallway, directly outside his study. He was holding something in his hand, turning it over slowly, and even from a distance Marianne could see what it was, the medical folder she'd looked through earlier. The one she'd been certain she'd replaced exactly as she'd found it. She'd been wrong. Miss Foster. His voice was quiet, controlled, and somehow more terrifying than if he'd been shouting. Would you bring that tray into my study, please? I think we need to have a conversation. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to grab Evelyn, get in her car, and drive until the mansion was just a bad memory in her rearview mirror. But her feet carried her forward, through the study door, into the room that smelled of her own recent transgression. She set the tray down on his desk with hands that only trembled slightly, then met his eyes with what she hoped looked like innocence. Is something wrong, Mr. Hartman? He laid the folder on the desk between them, his fingers spread across it like he was pressing down on something trying to escape. I have security cameras throughout this house, Miss Foster. Every room except the bathrooms and bedrooms. I installed them after the third caregiver proved to be unreliable. So imagine my surprise when I reviewed today's footage and saw you entering my private study, going through my private files, examining documents that are absolutely none of your concern. Marianne's stomach dropped to somewhere around her knees. Of course there were cameras. Of course this man who locked his daughter away and buried his secrets under layers of lies would also be paranoid enough to document everything. "I can explain," she started, but Richard raised a hand. "No, you can listen." He moved around the desk, and Marianne had to force herself not to back away. Up close, she could see the exhaustion in his face, the lines around his eyes, the gray threaded through his dark hair, the way his jaw worked like he was chewing on words too bitter to swallow. "You've been here less than 2 weeks, and already you're convinced you understand this family better than I do. Already you think you've uncovered some dark conspiracy." "Your daughter can see," Marianne said, abandoning pretense. If she was going to be fired anyway, she might as well speak the truth. "She's not blind, Mr. Hartman. Maybe she has some vision problems, maybe the damage from those glasses, those horrible glasses you made her wear, affected her eyesight, but she can see. And you know she can see. You've been forcing her to pretend for years." Something flickered in Richard's expression. Pain, perhaps, or recognition, or something closer to relief that finally someone had said it out loud. But it vanished quickly, replaced by that stony mask he wore so well. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said. "You don't know the first thing about what happened in this house, what choices I've had to make." "Then tell me." The words burst out of Marianne before she could stop them. "Tell me why you're doing this to her. Tell me what happened to your wife. Tell me why an 8-year-old child is so terrified of her own vision that she cries when she accidentally responds to light." The silence that followed was massive, crushing. Richard stared at her, and for a moment Marianne thought he might actually answer, might let the dam break and flood the room with whatever truth he'd been drowning in. But then his expression hardened again, and he walked to the study door, holding it open. "You're fired, Miss Foster. You have 1 hour to pack your belongings and leave this property. I'll have Helen prepare your final check, 2 weeks severance, which is more generous than you deserve. If you attempt to contact anyone about this family, if you go to the press or the police or Child Protective Services with your ridiculous theories, I will destroy you. My attorneys are very good at their jobs, and I have documentation of you trespassing in my private spaces, stealing confidential medical records. I didn't steal anything. Can you prove that? Do you have witnesses? Or is it your word against mine, and I have video evidence of you rifling through my desk?" He smiled, and it was the coldest thing Marianne had ever seen. "Leave quietly, Miss Foster. Consider yourself lucky that I'm letting you leave at all." Marianne wanted to argue, to fight, to tell him exactly what she thought of men who used their money and power to crush anyone who threatened their carefully constructed lies. But she thought of Evelyn upstairs, probably listening through the walls, probably terrified about what would happen now. She thought of the photo she'd seen, last happy day, and the woman who'd held that baby and somehow ended up dead. "I'll leave," she said quietly. "But this isn't over. Someone will figure out what you're hiding. Someone will save that little girl from you." "Save her?" Richard's laugh was harsh, broken. "You think you'd be saving her? You have no idea what you'd be unleashing. No idea what I've spent 8 years protecting her from." He walked out, leaving Marianne standing in his study with those cryptic words hanging in the air like smoke. An hour later, as she was packing her small collection of belongings into the same battered suitcase she'd arrived with, she heard a soft knock on her door. When she opened it, she found Helen standing there, holding an envelope that presumably contained her final check. But the older woman's face was troubled, less stern than Marianne had ever seen it. "You shouldn't have gone into his study," Helen said quietly. "I warned you not to get curious." "Someone had to," Marianne replied. "That child is being abused." "Is she?" Helen's question was sharp. "Is she really?" "She's fed, clothed, kept safe, given everything she could need. There are children in this world suffering real abuse, Miss Foster. Evelyn Hartman is not one of them. She's being forced to deny her own senses. She's locked in her room at night. She believes her ability to see is somehow connected to her mother's death." Helen's face paled slightly at that last part. "What did Evelyn tell you?" "Enough. Enough to know that something terrible happened in this house, and Richard has spent years covering it up by sacrificing his daughter's entire reality." Marianne grabbed the envelope from Helen's hands. "You know what happened, don't you? You've been here since the beginning. You helped him." The older woman's composure cracked. "I helped keep this family together. I helped prevent something worse. You think you understand, but you don't. Diana Hartman." She stopped, pressing her lips together as if physically preventing the words from escaping. "What about her? What happened to Evelyn's mother?" She was sick, Helen said finally. Mentally sick. Paranoid. After Evelyn was born, she became convinced that someone was trying to hurt the baby. She wouldn't let anyone near her, not the nannies, not even Richard sometimes. The doctor said it was postpartum psychosis, that she needed treatment, but Diana refused. She kept saying she had to protect Evelyn from them, whoever she thought they were. Marianne felt her certainty waver slightly. And then what? And then one day, when Evelyn was about 18 months old, Diana did something. Helen's voice broke. Something that hurt the baby's eyes. I don't know exactly what. Richard never told me the full details. But it was bad enough that they had to rush Evelyn to the hospital. The doctors managed to save her vision, mostly, but Diana couldn't live with what she'd done. She killed herself 3 days later. The room seemed to tilt. Marianne sat down hard on the edge of the bed, her mind reeling. But the glasses, those modified glasses Evelyn remembers, were part of the treatment, initially. Then Richard became paranoid that if Evelyn could see normally, she'd remember what her mother had done. The trauma of it. So he decided it was better if she just didn't see at all. Better if the world thought she was blind, if she thought she was blind, if everyone could just forget what had happened and move on. Helen's eyes were wet now. Was it the right choice? I don't know. But it was the choice he made, trying to protect his daughter from a memory that could destroy her. Marianne thought of Evelyn's face when she talked about her mother, the confusion and guilt and desperate need to be good enough to bring her back. It's destroying her anyway, she said. Just slower. He's turned her into a prisoner of a lie. Maybe, Helen acknowledged. But what's the alternative? Tell an 8-year-old that her mother went insane and tried to blind her? That the woman she should have been able to trust more than anyone in the world hurt her so badly she needed emergency surgery? How does a child recover from that truth? How does she recover from this? Marianne countered. From years of pretending, of being locked away, of thinking her own vision is something to be ashamed of? Helen had no answer for that. She simply pressed a business card into Marianne's hand along with the envelope. This is Dr. Morrison's card. He was Diana's psychiatrist before everything. If you really feel you need to understand what happened here, maybe he can explain it better than I can. But my advice, take your money and leave this family alone. Some wounds don't heal better when you dig them open. After Helen left, Marianne sat in her empty room and stared at the business card. Dr. Andrew Morrison, it read, with an address in Manhattan. Part of her wanted to do exactly what Helen suggested. Take the money, leave Connecticut, forget she'd ever met Evelyn Hartman. But she kept seeing the little girl's face when she'd whispered, I only make pretend that I don't see. So Marianne made 2 decisions. First, she would visit Dr. Morrison and get the full story. Second, she would find a way to help Evelyn, even if that meant going against Richard's army of lawyers and his threats. She was packing the last of her clothes when she heard a small sound at her door, not a knock, more like scratching. She opened it to find Evelyn standing there in her nightgown, her small face streaked with tears, Helen nowhere in sight. You're leaving, the girl whispered. Just like the others. Because of me. Marianne's heart shattered. She pulled Evelyn into a fierce hug, breaking every one of Richard's rules about emotional attachment. Not because of you, sweetheart. Never because of you. Because your father won't let me help you the way you deserve. Nobody can help me, Evelyn said into Marianne's shoulder. I'm too broken. That's what the darkness is for, to hide how broken I am. You're not broken. Marianne pulled back, taking Evelyn's face in her hands, making sure the girl was looking directly at her. Your eyes work. Your brain works. Your heart works, maybe too well, because you feel everything so deeply. The only broken thing in this house is the lie your father has built around you. But Mommy, whatever happened with your mother, it wasn't your fault. You were just a baby. Babies can't cause the kind of pain your father is running from. Marianne wiped Evelyn's tears with her thumbs. I'm going to leave tonight because I have to, but I'm not giving up on you. Do you understand? I'm going to find out the whole truth, and then I'm going to come back for you. Promise? The word was so small, so desperate. Promise, Marianne said, even though she had no idea how she would keep it. She left the Hartman estate at 9 o'clock that night, her car loaded with her few possessions and her mind loaded with questions. In her pocket was Dr. Morrison's card. In her heart was a fierce determination that surprised her with its intensity. As she drove down the long driveway, she looked in the rearview mirror and saw a small figure at an upstairs window. Evelyn watching her leave. And for just a moment, before the curtains fell shut again, Marianne could have sworn the girl raised one hand in a small, secret wave. a gesture that required seeing exactly where Marianne's car was. A gesture of hope from a child trapped in manufactured darkness. Marianne tightened her grip on the steering wheel and pressed the accelerator, heading toward Manhattan and whatever truth Dr. Morrison could provide. The story wasn't over. It was just beginning. Dr. Andrew Morrison's office was located in a brownstone on the Upper East Side, the kind of building where old money went to have its neuroses gently managed between sessions of squash at the club and charity galas at the Met. Marianne had called ahead, expecting to be turned away or told that patient confidentiality made any conversation impossible. Instead, Dr. Morrison's receptionist had said, in a voice that sounded almost relieved, "Dr. Morrison has been hoping someone would ask about the Hartman case. Can you come tomorrow at 2?" Now, sitting in the waiting room surrounded by abstract art and the smell of lavender from a diffuser on the reception desk, Marianne wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. What if this was a trap? What if Richard had somehow anticipated her moves and Dr. Morrison was about to hand her over to lawyers or worse? But when the doctor himself emerged from his office, a man in his late 60s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and a cardigan that had seen better days, those fears evaporated. He looked at Marianne with something close to gratitude. "Miss Foster? Please come in. I've been carrying this story for 8 years, and I think it's time someone else helped bear the weight." His office was cluttered in a way that spoke of a mind more interested in people than appearances. Books spilled from shelves, patient files stacked on every surface, a half-finished crossword puzzle on his desk. He gestured for Marianne to sit in a leather armchair that had molded itself to the shape of thousands of troubled souls before her. "I can't tell you specific details about Diana Hartman's treatment," he began, settling into his own chair with a sigh. "But I can tell you what's already in the public record and what I believe needs to be said. Patient confidentiality be damned. Sometimes silence becomes complicity." He pulled out a file from his desk, not an official patient file, but something he'd clearly compiled himself. Newspaper clippings, printed articles, his own handwritten notes. "Diana Hartman came to me in February 2017, when Evelyn was about 6 months old. She was experiencing severe postpartum anxiety, convinced that someone was trying to hurt her baby. Not uncommon, actually. Many new mothers have intrusive thoughts about harm coming to their infants. But with Diana it was different. More specific. More elaborate." He spread out the papers on his desk. Marianne leaned forward, her heart pounding. "She told me that Richard's business partner, a man named Marcus Voss, had been making strange comments about Evelyn, looking at her too long, asking invasive questions about her schedule, her routines. Diana became convinced that Voss was planning to kidnap the baby, that he was involved in some kind of trafficking ring." "Was he?" Marianne asked. Dr. Morrison shook his head slowly. "I don't know. That's the hell of it. I'll never know. Diana's paranoia was real, clinical, textbook postpartum psychosis. But that doesn't mean her fears were entirely unfounded. Sometimes paranoid people really do have enemies." He pulled out a photo, Diana Hartman looking gaunt and hollow-eyed, holding Evelyn in what appeared to be a hospital room. The baby's eyes were bandaged. This was taken after the incident. April 2017. Diana had become increasingly unstable, refusing medication, insisting that the doctors were all working for Voss, that everyone was conspiring against her. Richard was trying to have her committed, but she fled with the baby. They found her 2 days later in a motel in New Jersey. Marianne's hands had gone cold. What had she done? She'd tried to blind Evelyn. Dr. Morrison's voice was flat, clinical, as if distance was the only way he could speak these words. In Diana's fractured logic, if Evelyn couldn't see, she couldn't identify anyone who might try to take her. If she was disabled, she'd be less desirable to traffickers. She used a chemical cleaner, bleach mixed with ammonia, and tried to wash the baby's eyes with it. Marianne felt bile rise in her throat. The horror of it, not just the act itself, but the twisted maternal love that had motivated it. Diana had tried to destroy her daughter's vision to save her. "The doctors at Mount Sinai were able to save most of Evelyn's sight," Dr. Morrison continued. "But there was damage. Scarring on the corneas, some retinal injury. The child would need glasses, possibly surgery as she got older, but she could see. She would be able to live a normal life." "But Diana couldn't," Marianne said softly. "Diana hanged herself in the psychiatric ward 3 days after Evelyn was released from the hospital. She left a note saying she'd failed to protect her baby, that now they would come for her, and it was all her fault." He rubbed his eyes beneath his glasses. "Richard blamed himself. Blamed me. Blamed everyone except Diana, really, because he knew she'd been sick. But the guilt consumed him anyway. So he decided to make Evelyn blind after all, Marian said, the pieces falling into sickening place. To finish what Diana started, in some twisted way. I think he convinced himself it was protection. If the world believed Evelyn was blind, if she believed she was blind, then no one would look too closely at the family. No one would ask questions about what had happened. The scandal could be buried. Dr. Morrison's expression was anguished. I tried to intervene. I called Child Protective Services, but Richard's lawyers were too good. He had expert witnesses testifying that the special lenses were legitimate treatment, that keeping Evelyn isolated was necessary for her psychological recovery. And I had no proof of malicious intent, just concerns, suspicions, a bad feeling. Marcus Voss, Marian said suddenly. What happened to him? Dr. Morrison's face darkened. That's the thing that's haunted me all these years. Voss disappeared in May 2017, about 3 weeks after Diana's suicide. Just vanished, left his apartment, his job, everything. Police investigated briefly, but found no evidence of foul play. He'd been having financial problems, they said. Probably left the country to avoid creditors. Or someone made him disappear. I've thought that too. Many times. He leaned back in his chair. Here's what I know and what I suspect, Miss Foster. I know that Diana Hartman was genuinely mentally ill. I know she hurt her daughter in a psychotic episode. I know she took her own life out of guilt and continued delusion. Those are facts. And what do you suspect? I suspect that Marcus Voss really was doing something inappropriate regarding Evelyn. I suspect Diana's paranoia had a grain of truth buried in it. I suspect that Richard, in his grief and rage, might have done something about Voss that he can never take back. And I suspect he's been punishing himself ever since by punishing his daughter, keeping her locked away not just from the world, but from the truth of what her mother did and what he might have done in response. The room felt too small suddenly, the air too thick. Marian thought of Richard's face when he'd said, "You have no idea what I've spent 8 years protecting her from." Not protecting her, protecting himself from having to face what he'd done. There's something else, Dr. Morrison said, pulling out one more document. I shouldn't show you this, but I think you need to see it. This is Diana's last journal entry, written the day before she died. He handed Marian a photocopy of a page covered in frantic handwriting. I failed her. I tried to save my baby, and I failed. But Richard will protect her now. He promised me. He said he'll make sure Voss can never hurt her, never touch her, never even look at her again. He said he'll keep her safe in the darkness where monsters can't find her. I believe him. That's the only reason I can let go. Richard will keep our Evelyn in the dark, and she'll be safe. The darkness will save her. Marianne's hands shook as she read it again. Diana hadn't just been insane. She'd given Richard instructions. She'd told him to keep Evelyn in darkness, and he'd spent 8 years following his dead wife's final wishes, even as they destroyed their daughter. What can I do? Marianne asked, looking up at Dr. Morrison with desperate eyes. How do I save her from this? Legally? It's nearly impossible. Richard hasn't technically broken any laws. He has medical documentation supporting his decisions. The child is fed, housed, not physically harmed in ways that leave marks. Courts are reluctant to remove children from wealthy families with good lawyers. He paused. But morally? Ethically? That child is being psychologically tortured. She needs to know the truth age-appropriately with proper therapeutic support, but she needs to know. And she needs her vision properly assessed and treated, not suppressed. Richard will never allow that. Then you'll have to force his hand somehow. Get evidence. Get allies. Make enough noise that he can't keep hiding behind his money and his guilt. Dr. Morrison stood, moving to his window that looked out over the Manhattan streets below. I've spent 8 years trying to forget Diana Hartman, trying to convince myself I did everything I could. But I didn't. I let lawyers and liability concerns stop me from fighting harder. Don't make my mistake, Miss Foster. Marian left his office with the photocopied journal entry folded in her purse and a plan forming in her mind. Desperate, probably doomed, but the only thing she could think to do. She would go back to Greenwich. She would document everything. She would find a way into that house, into those locked rooms Richard kept closed, and she would expose whatever truth he was hiding. But first, she needed help. She made 3 phone calls from her car. The first was to a friend from nursing school who worked at Connecticut's Department of Children and Families. The second was to a private investigator she'd found online who specialized in family cases. The third was to Helen's cell phone, a number the housekeeper had written on the back of Dr. Morrison's card, hidden where Richard wouldn't see it. Helen answered on the fourth ring. "I was wondering when you'd call." "You want to help her too," Marianne said. It wasn't a question. "I've wanted to help her for 8 years. But I'm a coward, Miss Foster. I needed someone braver than me to start the fight." Helen's voice was thick with emotion. "What do you need?" "Access to the house. To the rooms Richard keeps locked. To whatever he's hiding in there." "There's a door on the 3rd floor," Helen said quietly. "At the end of the east corridor. It's been locked since Diana died. Richard goes in there sometimes, late at night when he thinks everyone's asleep. I don't know what's inside, but I know he comes out looking like he's seen ghosts." "Can you get me the key?" A long pause. Then, "He keeps all the keys in his study, in the bottom right drawer of his desk." "But Miss Foster, Marianne, if you do this, there's no going back. He'll know it was me who helped you. I'll lose everything. And if we don't do this, Evelyn loses everything. She's already lost 8 years." Another pause. Then softly, "Come Thursday night. Richard has a business dinner in the city. He'll be gone from 7 until at least midnight. I'll leave the service entrance unlocked. The security system code is 0415, Diana's birthday." "Thank you," Marianne whispered. "Don't thank me yet. We don't know what we're going to find behind that door. It might be nothing. It might be everything. But either way, after Thursday night, nothing will ever be the same for this family." After the call ended, Marianne sat in her car outside Dr. Morrison's office and watched people hurry past on the sidewalk. Normal people living normal lives, unburdened by secrets that twisted children into prisoners and turned grief into abuse. She thought about backing out, about taking her severance check and finding another job somewhere far from Connecticut. But then she thought of Evelyn's small voice. "I only make pretend that I don't see because he said it would happen again." No, she couldn't walk away. Not now. Not when she was so close to understanding what it was, what had happened in that house beyond Diana's documented psychosis and Voss's disappearance. Thursday night. 3 days away. 3 days to prepare for whatever truth lay behind that locked door on the 3rd floor. Marianne started her car and headed back toward Connecticut, toward the Hartman estate, toward a reckoning that had been 8 years in the making. Thursday night arrived with the kind of cold that made Marianne's bones ache, a November wind that stripped the last leaves from the trees and sent them skittering across the Hartman estate's grounds like tiny ghosts. She'd parked her Honda 3 blocks away, approaching the mansion on foot, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat, in her fingertips, in the rushing sound of blood in her ears. The service entrance was unlocked, just as Helen had promised. Marianne slipped inside, into the kitchen that still smelled faintly of the dinner Teresa had prepared hours ago, roasted chicken and rosemary that seemed absurdly normal given what she was about to do. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant ticking of the grandfather clock in the foyer. Helen had sent everyone home early, claiming she had a migraine and needed the house quiet. Marianne found her in the kitchen, sitting at the small staff table with a cup of tea she wasn't drinking. The older woman looked like she'd aged a decade in the 3 days since their phone call, her face drawn and pale, her hands trembling slightly as she set down the cup. "He left 20 minutes ago," Helen said without preamble. "But we need to hurry. Sometimes he forgets things and comes back early." She pulled a keyring from her pocket, a small collection of old-fashioned keys that looked like they belonged in a Gothic novel. "The brass one opens the 3rd floor door. I don't know what the others are for, but they were with it in his drawer." Marianne took the keys, their weight somehow more significant than it should have been. "Where's Evelyn?" "Asleep. I gave her warm milk an hour ago. Nothing sedating, just comfort. She's been having nightmares again since you left. Crying out for her mother. Asking why everyone leaves her." Helen's voice cracked. "Please tell me we're doing the right thing. Please tell me this isn't going to make everything worse." "I don't know," Marianne admitted. "But doing nothing definitely isn't right. That much I know." They climbed the stairs together, past the 2nd floor where Evelyn slept behind her locked door, up to the 3rd floor that Marianne had never been allowed to access. The corridor here was narrower, darker, the ceilings lower. Storage space, probably, or servants' quarters from when the house was first built in the 1920s. Most of the doors stood open, revealing empty rooms thick with dust. But at the end of the hall, one door was different. Newer, reinforced, with a deadbolt that looked recently installed. And unlike every other surface in this meticulously maintained house, this door showed signs of use. Scratches around the lock, worn spots where hands had pushed it open countless times. Marianne's hands shook as she fitted the brass key into the lock. It turned with a soft click that sounded like a gunshot in the silence. She looked at Helen one more time, seeing her own fear reflected in the older woman's face, then pushed the door open. The smell hit her first, not decay or anything terrible, but something sadder, the stale air of a space that had been sealed off from life for too long. Mothballs and old paper, and that particular scent of grief that seemed to permeate certain places where tragedy had occurred. Helen found a light switch. The overhead bulb flickered to life, revealing a room that made Marianne's breath catch in her throat. It was a shrine. That was the only word for it. Every surface covered with photographs of Diana Hartmann. Diana pregnant, Diana laughing, Diana holding newborn Evelyn, Diana at their wedding, Diana in 100 different moments of a life cut short. The walls were covered with them, overlapping, a wallpaper of memory and loss. But someone had drawn over many of them with red marker, angry slashes, scribbled words Marianne couldn't quite read from where she stood. In the center of the room sat a hospital-style chair, the kind used for medical examinations. Restraints dangled from the armrests. Next to it, a small table held medical instruments that made Marianne's nursing training scream warnings. Syringes, bottles of solution, eye examination tools, and something that looked like modified glasses with opaque lenses attached to some kind of light therapy device. "Oh God," Helen whispered. "Oh my God, what was he doing to her?" Marianne moved deeper into the room, her legs feeling disconnected from her body. On a desk in the corner sat stacks of notebooks, journals, filled with Richard's handwriting. She picked up the one on top, dated 2018, and opened to a random page. Day 287. Evelyn's vision is still functional despite the corrective treatments. She continues to respond to visual stimuli when she thinks no one is watching. Diana was right. The darkness is the only way to keep her safe. If she can't see, she can't identify. If she can't identify, they can't use her. Must maintain the protocol. Marianne flipped through more pages, finding similar entries, each more disturbing than the last. References to maintaining visual suppression, to light sensitivity conditioning, to necessary interventions. Richard hadn't just been making Evelyn pretend to be blind. He'd been actively trying to damage her vision, using that chair, those instruments, those modified glasses that would force her eyes to strain and possibly deteriorate over time. "He's been conducting experiments on her," Marianne said, her voice hollow. "His own daughter. He's been trying to actually make her blind." Helen was crying now, soft broken sounds as she looked at the photos on the walls. "I knew something was wrong. I knew those sessions in his study weren't normal. But I told myself it was grief, that he was just trying to help her cope with the trauma. I didn't want to believe." A sound from downstairs froze them both. The front door opening. Footsteps in the foyer. Richard was home early. Marianne grabbed 2 of the journals and shoved them in her jacket. Helen was already moving toward the door, but Marianne caught her arm. "The photos," she whispered. "Take pictures with your phone. Evidence." They worked frantically, Helen snapping photos of the room, the chair, the medical equipment, while Marianne photographed pages from the journals. Footsteps on the stairs now, coming closer. Richard's voice calling out, "Helen? Why are the lights on upstairs?" They ran from the room, Helen locking it behind them with shaking hands. But they weren't fast enough. Richard appeared at the top of the 3rd-floor stairs just as they reached the landing, his face shifting from confusion to understanding to fury in the space of seconds. "What are you doing here?" He looked at Marianne, then at Helen, then at the keys in the housekeeper's hand. "You let her back in. You gave her access to." His eyes moved to the locked door behind them, and something in his expression cracked. "You went in there?" "Yes," Marianne said, stepping forward, placing herself between Richard and Helen. "We went in there. We saw everything. The chair, the equipment, your journals documenting how you've been systematically trying to destroy your daughter's vision. It's over, Richard. We have evidence now. We have proof." For a moment, she thought he might lunge at them, might try to grab the keys or her phone, or do something violent to protect his secrets. But instead, Richard Hartmann seemed to collapse inward, all the rage draining out of him and leaving behind something raw and broken. "You don't understand," he said, his voice cracking. "You don't understand what I was protecting her from." "Then explain it," Marianne demanded. "Explain why you've spent 8 years torturing a child. Explain the chair, the experiments, the forced blindness. Make it make sense." Richard moved past them to the locked door, pressing his palm against it like he could feel what lay beyond. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Marcus Voss. Diana was right about him. Not the trafficking, that was her psychosis talking, but she was right that he was dangerous. He was embezzling from my company, millions of dollars, and he knew I was getting close to figuring it out. Diana's paranoia actually uncovered his crimes by accident. She'd been investigating him, taking photos, documenting his movements. He laughed bitterly. The night Diana heard Evelyn, Voss called me. Told me that if I exposed him, if I went to the police, he had evidence that would destroy me, fabricated records showing I was complicit in the embezzlement, that I'd been covering it up. He said he'd make sure I went to prison, that Evelyn would end up in foster care. Unless I kept quiet. So you kept quiet, Helen said, her voice full of disgust. You let him get away with it. No. Richard's eyes were hollow. I made him disappear. I hired people, terrible people, and I made Marcus Voss vanish. But before he died, he told them about Evelyn. About how she'd been there that night Diana lost control, how she might have seen things, heard things. How as she got older, she might remember. And these people, these contractors I'd hired, they told me that if Evelyn ever became a problem, if she ever could identify them or connect them to Voss's disappearance, they'd eliminate that problem. The horror of it settled over Marianne like a shroud. You didn't keep her blind to protect her from the memory of what Diana did. You kept her blind so she couldn't identify your hired killers. So she couldn't be a witness. So she'd never be a threat to them. If the world believed she was blind, if she believed she was blind, then she couldn't possibly identify anyone. She'd be safe from them. They'd have no reason to hurt her. Richard's voice broke completely. I know what I did was wrong. I know I've damaged my daughter, maybe irreparably. But the alternative was letting her grow up with a target on her back, letting her be vulnerable to people who kill for money. I couldn't let them touch her. Diana died, trying to keep her safe. I had to finish what she started, even if it meant becoming a monster. Marianne felt tears streaming down her face. The awful logic of it, the terrible choice between two kinds of destruction. But still, you became a monster, Richard. You tortured your own child for 8 years. There had to be another way. Witness protection, security, something other than what you did. You think I didn't explore every option? You think I didn't spend years trying to find another solution? Richard's anguish was palpable. But these people have connections everywhere. Police, prosecutors, federal agencies. Voss's disappearance opened up an investigation that went nowhere because someone buried it. They're powerful, they're patient, and they told me explicitly, if your daughter can see, if she could ever identify us, she's a liability. Keep her blind, and we'll leave her alone. Who are they? Marianne demanded. Give me names. Let's go to the authorities. The authorities are part of them. Don't you understand? This is bigger than one corrupt businessman. This goes to the top of Connecticut's financial and political establishment. Marcus Voss was just one piece of a machine that's been running for decades. Richard's laugh was unhinged. I've been protecting Evelyn from people who could make her disappear, and no one would ever ask questions. At least this way, at least with the blindness, she's alive. She's here. She's destroyed, Marianne interrupted. She thinks her own vision killed her mother. She lives in constant fear and isolation. You saved her life by making it not worth living. A small voice from the stairwell made them all freeze. Daddy? Evelyn stood at the top of the second-floor stairs, her nightgown ghostly white in the dim light. And for the first time since Marianne had met her, the girl's eyes were open, fully open, looking directly at her father with perfect, heartbreaking clarity. I can see you, Daddy, Evelyn said, her voice trembling. I've always been able to see you, and I heard everything you just said. The silence that followed was absolute. Richard stared at his daughter, this child he'd imprisoned to save, and seemed to understand that he'd lost her anyway. Not to killers or conspiracies or any external threat, but to his own terrible choices. Evelyn's eyes, those perfectly functional eyes that had been hidden behind curtains and darkness and lies for 8 years, filled with tears. I don't understand. Why didn't you just tell me? Why did you make me pretend? Why did you make me think I was broken? Because I thought it would keep you safe, Richard whispered. Because I thought if you believed the lie, it would protect you. From who? From bad people who might hurt me. Evelyn's voice rose. But you're the one who hurt me, Daddy. You're the one who made me afraid of light. You're the one who locked me away. All those nights I cried and you never came. I thought you hated me. I thought I'd done something so terrible that you couldn't even look at me. No, baby, no. Richard moved toward her, but Evelyn stepped back. Don't Don't come near me. I don't know who you are anymore." The girl turned to Marianne, and the trust in her eyes was devastating. "Can I leave now? Can I go somewhere else? Somewhere with windows and light?" Marianne knelt down to Evelyn's level, taking her small hands. "Yes, sweetheart. You can leave. I promise you, you're never going to be locked in darkness again." She looked up at Richard, who stood broken and defeated, all his terrible choices finally catching up to him. "It's over," she said simply. "Tonight, Evelyn comes with me. Tomorrow, we go to every authority we can find until we find someone not on your conspiracy's payroll. We tell them everything, and Evelyn gets the life she should have had all along." Richard didn't fight. He simply nodded, tears streaming down his face, and watched as Marian led his daughter down the stairs, out of the house of locked doors and buried secrets, into a future that was uncertain, but at least honest. They didn't make it to the front door. Richard's voice stopped them at the bottom of the grand staircase, and there was something in his tone that made Marianne's blood turn to ice. Not anger, not desperation, but something closer to resignation mixed with a terrible kind of determination. "You can't take her," he said, descending the stairs slowly, his hand gripping the banister like it was the only thing keeping him upright. "Not yet. Not until you understand what you're exposing her to. Not until you know exactly who will come for her the moment you walk out that door." Marianne positioned herself between Richard and Evelyn, her arm wrapped protectively around the girl's shoulders. "You don't get to threaten us anymore. We have evidence. We have witnesses. Helen saw everything." "Helen saw a room full of medical equipment and a father's desperate journals," Richard interrupted, his voice eerily calm now. "She saw the methods I used, but not the reason behind them. You think you can go to the police? The FBI? Child Protective Services?" He laughed, and it was the sound of something fundamental breaking. "Let me show you why that's impossible." He pulled out his phone, his hands shaking as he scrolled through something. Then he turned the screen toward them. It was a photo recent, maybe a few days old, of Evelyn's room. But the angle was wrong, taken from outside the window, through the gap in the curtains. Someone had been watching. Someone had been documenting. "This was sent to me yesterday," Richard said quietly. "No message. Just the photo. A reminder that they're always watching. That they know exactly where she is, what she's doing, how accessible she is." Marianne felt Evelyn trembling against her side. "That doesn't prove anything except that you've hired people to stalk your own daughter." "I didn't hire anyone to take that photo." Richard's composure cracked. "Don't you understand? They're watching her. They've never stopped watching her. The only reason they haven't acted is because they believe she's blind, that she's no threat. But the moment you parade her in front of authorities, the moment she becomes a potential witness, they'll eliminate that liability. I've kept her alive by keeping her hidden, by keeping her supposedly useless as a witness." Helen had emerged from the kitchen, drawn by the raised voices. Her face was pale, but her expression was resolute. "Then we go to the media. We make this so public that they can't touch her without exposing themselves." "The media?" Richard turned to her, and his eyes were wild now. "You think the media will protect an 8-year-old girl from people who've made careers out of making problems disappear? You think publicity is armor against a bullet or a staged accident or a kidnapping that looks like a runaway? So what's your solution?" Marianne demanded, her voice rising. "Keep her locked up forever? Keep pretending she's blind until she's 20, 30, 40 years old? Until she forgets what it's like to actually live? That's not protection, Richard. That's just a slower kind of death. My solution is time." Richard was shouting now, all pretense of control abandoned. "Time to build a real case against these people. Time to gather enough evidence that taking her out becomes riskier than leaving her alone. I've been working on it for years, documenting everything, finding allies, building a network of people who aren't corrupt. I'm close, maybe 6 months away from having enough to bring them down properly. But if you take her now, if you expose this before I'm ready, you'll sign her death warrant. Or you're lying," Marianne shot back. "Or you're just buying more time to continue your abuse, to continue playing God with your daughter's life. How convenient that you always need just a little more time, that the danger is always just present enough to justify another year, another decade of torture." The accusation hung in the air like poison. Richard's face crumpled, and for a moment Marianne saw past the billionaire, past the calculating abuser, to something more human and more broken than she'd imagined possible. "You're right," he whispered. "You're right that I've used the threat to justify the unjustifiable. You're right that somewhere along the way, protecting her became indistinguishable from imprisoning her. You're right that I've become exactly what I was trying to protect her from. He looked at Evelyn, and the pain in his expression was raw, devastating. Baby, I'm so sorry. I thought I was saving you. I thought if I could just control everything, keep you safe from every possible danger, that somehow it would make up for what happened to your mother. That it would make up for what I did to Marcus Voss. Evelyn had been silent through this entire exchange, pressed against Marianne's side, but now she spoke, her small voice cutting through the chaos. Did you kill that man? The one Mommy was afraid of? The question was so direct, so childlike in its simplicity, that it seemed to stop time itself. Richard stared at his daughter, and Marianne watched him grapple with how to answer, whether to lie to preserve some illusion of innocence, or to tell the truth and let her see him completely. Yes, he said finally. I hired men to kill Marcus Voss. He was going to destroy our family, and I thought I was protecting us. But I was wrong. Killing him didn't protect anyone. It just created new dangers, new threats, new reasons to be afraid. And I've spent every day since then trying to manage those consequences, trying to keep you safe from the ripple effects of my own terrible choice. So Mommy died because she was sick, Evelyn said slowly, working through the logic with heartbreaking precision. And you made me pretend to be blind because you killed someone and you were scared. But I didn't do anything wrong. The bad things weren't my fault. No, baby. None of it was your fault. You were innocent in all of this. You still are. Tears were streaming down Evelyn's face now, but her voice was steady, stronger than Marianne had ever heard it. Then why did you punish me? Why did you lock me away like I was the one who did something bad? Richard had no answer for that. None that would make sense. None that would undo 8 years of damage. He simply stood there, his own tears falling, his hands hanging uselessly at his sides. Marianne felt Evelyn's grip on her tighten. I want to leave now, the girl said. I want to go with Marianne. I don't want to be here anymore. Evelyn, please, Richard started forward, but Helen moved to block him. Let her go, Richard, the housekeeper said, her voice firm despite her own tears. Let her have a chance at something better than this. Whatever threats are out there, whatever dangers exist, they can't be worse than what you've done to her soul. They'll kill her, Richard said desperately. They'll find her and they'll kill her, and it will be my fault. At least here, at least with me, I can see her, protect her. You can't protect someone you're destroying, Marianne said. That's not how protection works. The sound of sirens in the distance made them all freeze. Helen pulled out her phone, her expression guilty but determined. I called the police before I came downstairs. And Child Protective Services. I'm sorry, Richard, but this has to end tonight. One way or another, it has to end. Richard's face went white. Helen, what have you done? You've exposed her. You've made her visible. They'll know now. They'll see the investigation and they'll act. Or they'll see that the house of cards is falling and they'll run, Helen countered. Or they'll realize that killing a child who's now under official protection is too risky. You don't know what they'll do, Richard. You've been so consumed by fear that you've stopped thinking rationally. You've been making decisions based on possibilities instead of probabilities. The sirens were getting louder. Blue lights began to flash through the windows, painting the white walls in alternating shadows and illumination. Marianne could feel Evelyn shaking against her, overwhelmed by the chaos, by the revelations, by 8 years of lies finally crashing down around them all. I need to tell you something, Richard said urgently, moving toward Evelyn despite Helen's attempt to block him. Before they get here, before everything falls apart completely, I need you to know, your mother loved you. Everything she did, even the terrible thing that hurt you, she did it because her mind was broken and she thought she was protecting you. And everything I did because I couldn't lose you too. I chose wrong. I chose the worst possible path. But it all came from love, Evelyn. Twisted, damaged, destructive love, but love nonetheless. Love isn't supposed to hurt like this, Evelyn said, and the wisdom in those words, coming from an 8-year-old who'd been forced to grow up in darkness, made Marianne's heart shatter. Love isn't supposed to lock you away and make you afraid and tell you that you're broken when you're not. You're right, Richard whispered. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, baby girl. I hope someday you can forgive me, but I understand if you can't. I understand if you hate me for the rest of your life. The police were at the door now, their knocking sharp and official. Helen went to let them in while Marianne held Evelyn close, whispering promises about safety and light and a future where she wouldn't have to pretend anymore. As the officers entered, a woman with kind eyes and a man who looked tired but competent, Richard made no attempt to run or fight. He simply stood in his grand foyer, surrounded by the wreckage of his choices, and waited for the consequences he'd spent 8 years trying to outrun. "Richard Hartman?" the female officer asked. "We've received reports of child endangerment. We need to speak with you about your daughter's living conditions." "She's right here," Richard said, his voice hollow. "She's alive. She's unharmed physically. That's more than Marcus Voss can say, more than my wife can say. At least I kept her alive." The officer's expression shifted as she saw Evelyn pressed against Marianne, saw the fear and confusion in the child's face. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step back. And someone needs to explain what's going on here." What followed was chaos, statements taken, evidence collected, phone calls made to social workers and supervisors. Marianne showed them the journals she'd taken from the locked room, explained about the modified glasses and the chair with restraints. Helen corroborated everything, her voice shaking but resolute. Richard didn't deny any of it. He simply sat on the stairs where his daughter had stood moments before and watched his empire of fear finally collapse. The social worker who arrived, a woman named Patricia Chun with warm eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, knelt down to speak with Evelyn directly. "Hi, sweetheart. I know this is scary and confusing. Can you tell me how you're feeling right now?" Evelyn looked at her with those eyes that had been hidden for so long, and said, "I feel like I can see clearly for the first time. Not just with my eyes, but with everything. I can see that my daddy did bad things because he was scared. I can see that Marian wants to help me. And I can see that I don't have to be afraid of light anymore." Patricia Chin nodded slowly, then looked up at Marianne. "And you're willing to serve as emergency foster placement pending investigation?" "Yes," Marianne said without hesitation. "Whatever she needs. However long it takes." "Daddy." Evelyn's voice was small again. "Before I go, can I ask you one more thing?" Richard looked up, hope and dread warring in his expression. "Anything, baby. The people you're afraid of, the ones who might hurt me, are they real? Or did you make them up to justify what you did?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Marianne realized that this was the crux of everything, whether Richard's paranoia was justified or whether he'd created his own prison of fear and dragged his daughter into it. Richard met his daughter's eyes, those perfectly functional eyes he'd spent years trying to suppress, and gave her the only gift he had left, the truth. "I don't know anymore," he admitted. "They were real once. Marcus Voss was real, the people I hired were real, the threats were real. But somewhere along the way, I stopped being able to tell the difference between genuine danger and my own guilt and fear. I kept you in darkness partly to protect you from them, and partly to protect myself from having to face what I'd done. From having to see you look at me the way you're looking at me now." Evelyn nodded slowly, processing this. Then she said something that would echo in Marianne's mind forever. "I forgive you, Daddy. Not because what you did was okay, it wasn't. But because staying angry would just be another kind of darkness, and I'm done living in the dark." Then she turned to Marianne and said, "Can we go now? Can we go somewhere with windows?" "Yes, sweetheart," Marianne said, her voice thick with tears. "We can go somewhere with all the windows you want." 6 months later, spring came to New Haven like a promise finally kept. Marianne stood in the kitchen of her small apartment, watching through the window as Evelyn sat in the patch of garden behind the building, her face turned up toward the sun with an expression of such pure contentment that it made Marianne's throat tight with emotion every single time she witnessed it. The girl was drawing, something she did constantly now, as if making up for 8 years of seeing the world but never being allowed to capture it. Her sketchbook was filled with images of light, sunbeams breaking through clouds, shadows stretching across sidewalks, the way morning illumination caught in dewdrops on grass. A therapist might say she was processing trauma through art. Marianne thought it was simpler than that. Evelyn was finally allowed to celebrate what her eyes could do, and she was making up for lost time with the fierce dedication of someone who'd almost had that gift taken away forever. The investigation into Richard Hartman had taken months to untangle, revealing a web of truth and paranoia so interwoven that even the federal prosecutors weren't entirely sure where one ended and the other began. Marcus Voss's disappearance had been real, and so had Richard's involvement in it. That much was proven through financial records and testimony from one of the contractors he'd hired, a man who'd agreed to testify in exchange for a reduced sentence on unrelated charges. But the vast conspiracy Richard had feared, the powerful network that would supposedly kill Evelyn if she could see, that part was murkier, built on half-truths and Richard's own escalating paranoia. Yes, Voss had been involved in financial crimes that reached into Connecticut's business elite. Yes, there were powerful people who would have preferred his disappearance remain uninvestigated. But the specific threat to Evelyn, the idea that they were actively monitoring her, waiting for her to become a witness they needed to eliminate, that appeared to be largely a construction of Richard's guilt-ridden imagination. The photo he'd shown them that night, the one supposedly proving they were watching, traced back to a private investigator Richard himself had hired years ago to monitor the property's security. The man had been taking routine surveillance photos and sending them to Richard monthly. But by that point, Richard's mental state was so fractured that he'd interpreted his own security footage as evidence of external threats. Dr. Morrison had explained it to Marianne over coffee one afternoon, his voice heavy with the weight of professional hindsight. Guilt can be as destructive as psychosis. Richard committed a terrible crime, murder, even if he hired others to do it. And instead of facing that reality, he constructed an elaborate justification. The threats had to be everywhere, enormous, ongoing, or else he'd have to admit that he destroyed his daughter's childhood for nothing more than his own fear and shame. Richard was in prison now, awaiting trial on charges related to Voss's murder. His lawyers were arguing diminished capacity, presenting evidence of his deteriorating mental state over the years. The journals Marianne had taken from that locked room told the story of a man descending into paranoid delusion, convinced he was protecting his daughter even as he systematically abused her. Evelyn visited him once a month, supervised sessions in a stark room that smelled of industrial cleaner and regret. Marianne always waited outside, giving them privacy but staying close enough that Evelyn knew she could leave whenever she wanted. The girl usually emerged quiet and thoughtful, processing emotions too complex for someone so young to carry. But she insisted on going, said she needed to see him to understand that he was real, that the monster who'd locked her away and the father who'd once loved her were the same person. "He's getting smaller," Evelyn had said after the last visit, buckling herself into Marianne's car with careful precision. "Every time I see him, he looks smaller. Like the fear made him big and scary, but now that the fear is gone, he's just sad and old and broken." Marianne had wanted to say something profound, something therapeutic and wise. Instead, she'd just held Evelyn's hand and driven them home, letting the spring sunshine through the windshield say what words couldn't. The medical evaluation of Evelyn's vision had revealed damage, as expected, scarring from the chemical burns Diana had inflicted, strain from the years of modified glasses and deliberate visual suppression. But the doctors at Yale New Haven Hospital had been cautiously optimistic. With proper corrective lenses, regular therapy, and possibly surgery when she was older, Evelyn could have functional vision. Not perfect, never perfect, but enough. Enough to read, to draw, to see the faces of people who loved her and the world she'd been denied for so long. "She's remarkably resilient," Dr. Patricia Okafor, the ophthalmologist, had told Marianne during their last appointment. "Children often are. The human eye wants to work, wants to see. We just have to give it the proper support and let nature do most of the healing." The emotional healing was harder, messier, nonlinear. Evelyn had nightmares still, dreams where she was back in that dim room, where the curtains were closing, where her eyes were being covered with those horrible modified glasses, and she couldn't scream, couldn't protest, could only sink back into enforced darkness. She'd wake sobbing, disoriented, needing Marianne to turn on every light in the apartment and remind her that she was safe, that she could see, that the darkness was only ever temporary now. But there were good days too. So many good days they outnumbered the bad ones exponentially. Days like today, when Evelyn had woken up early and begged to go to the farmer's market downtown, where she could see the colors of vegetables and flowers, where she could watch people's faces as they talked and laughed, where the world was loud and bright and overwhelming in the best possible way. Helen had testified on Marianne's behalf during the foster care proceedings, her statement about Richard's abuse and her own complicity delivered with unflinching honesty. "I should have acted sooner," she told the judge. "I should have protected that child instead of protecting my job and my own comfort. Miss Foster did what I should have done years ago. She saw a wrong and she risked everything to right it." Helen had lost her position at the Hartman estate, of course. The mansion was being sold to settle Richard's legal fees and eventual restitution. But she'd found work quickly with another family, bringing references from the prosecutors who'd been impressed by her courage in coming forward. She visited Evelyn every Sunday, bringing pastries from a bakery in Greenwich and stories about her new employer's ridiculous cats. "You saved her," Helen had told Marianne once, quietly, while Evelyn was showing them both her latest drawings. You saved her when the rest of us were too scared or too complicit to try. We saved her, Marianne had corrected. You made the call that night. You gave me access to that room. You testified. We did it together. Teresa and James had testified too, admitting they'd suspected something was wrong, but had been too afraid of losing their jobs to speak up. Their guilt was palpable, but Marianne understood it. The same fear that had paralyzed them had almost paralyzed her too. The only difference was that she'd gotten angry enough to overcome it. Dr. Morrison had become an unexpected ally, providing expert testimony about Diana's mental illness and how Richard's response to it had evolved from protective to destructive. He'd also connected Marianne with a child psychologist named Dr. Sarah Chen, who specialized in trauma recovery. Dr. Chen met with Evelyn twice a week, helping her process not just what had been done to her, but why, helping her understand that her father's abuse came from a twisted place of love and fear, that her mother's violence came from illness, and that none of it reflected on Evelyn's worth or wholeness as a person. The hardest part, Dr. Chun had told Marianne during one of their parallel sessions, will be helping her trust her own perceptions. She spent 8 years being told that what she saw wasn't real, that her eyes were lying to her. Rebuilding that fundamental trust in her own senses, that's going to take time and patience. But Evelyn was doing it. Slowly, courageously, she was learning to believe in what she saw. And what she saw now, as Marianne watched from the kitchen window, was a butterfly landing on her sketchbook, a small yellow butterfly that Evelyn followed with her eyes, tracking its movement with precision and wonder, reaching out to let it crawl onto her finger. Marianne's phone buzzed. A text from the social worker, Patricia Chin, who'd become more friend than bureaucrat over these months. Hearing is scheduled for next month. Judge is inclined to grant permanent custody to you. Start thinking about adoption paperwork if that's something you want. Adoption. The word made Marianne's heart race. She and Evelyn had talked about it carefully, making sure the girl understood she had choices, that being adopted didn't mean erasing her father or her history, just building a new future. Would you be my mom? Evelyn had asked one night, her voice small in the darkness of her bedroom, a darkness she'd chosen, not one imposed on her. Like officially? If that's what you want, Marianne had answered. I would be honored to be your mom. But I can still see Daddy sometimes? Even if you're my mom? Yes, sweetheart. I would never take that choice away from you. Evelyn had thought about it for a long moment. Then, okay. I think I want that. I think I want to be Evelyn Foster. Is that okay? That's more than okay, Marianne had whispered, holding the girl close. That's everything. Now, watching Evelyn in the garden, Marianne let herself imagine the future. First days of school, learning to ride a bike, middle school drama, high school graduations, college applications, all the ordinary, extraordinary moments that make up a life. A life lived in light, with choices and windows and the freedom to see. She went outside, carrying 2 glasses of lemonade. Evelyn looked up from her drawing and smiled, a real smile, unguarded and bright. Look what I drew, she said, turning the sketchbook around. It was a picture of the apartment building, with every window illuminated, light spilling out into the evening. In one window, she'd drawn 2 figures, a woman and a girl, standing together. It's beautiful, Marianne said, her voice thick. Tell me about it. It's us, Evelyn explained. It's home. I wanted to draw what home looks like now. She paused, then added softly, it looks like light. Marianne sat down beside her in the grass, and they watched the sun move across the sky together, casting their shadows long and clear across the ground. Proof that they were here, that they were real, that they'd survived the darkness and found their way to something better. Later that evening, after dinner and homework and the bedtime routine they'd developed over months of learning to be a family, Evelyn asked one final question. Do you think Daddy will ever forgive himself? Marianne considered this carefully. I don't know, sweetheart. Sometimes the hardest person to forgive is yourself. Your dad did terrible things for complicated reasons, and he'll have to live with that. But I think seeing you happy, seeing you thriving, I think that helps him know that despite everything, you're okay. I am okay, Evelyn said, and it sounded like a discovery. I'm actually okay. Better than okay. I'm happy. Yes, you are, Marianne agreed, tucking the blankets around her. You're happy and brave and so strong. And I can see, Evelyn added, her eyes, those remarkable, functional, beautiful eyes, reflecting the nightlight Marianne had installed at her request. Not because she needed it to navigate, but because she liked waking up and seeing light, being reminded that the darkness was only ever temporary now. Yes, baby, Marianne whispered. You can see. You can see everything." As she left Evelyn's room, leaving the door cracked open so light from the hallway could spill in, Marianne thought about the journey that had brought them here. From that first day in the Hartmann mansion, when she'd noticed Evelyn react to light she supposedly couldn't perceive, through the investigation and revelations and heartbreak, to this small apartment where a child was learning to trust the world again. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. Richard was still in prison, probably would be for years. Evelyn still had nightmares and would carry scars, physical and emotional, for the rest of her life. The road ahead would have challenges they couldn't even anticipate yet. But tonight, a little girl who'd spent 8 years trapped in manufactured darkness was sleeping peacefully in a room full of light she'd chosen herself. And that felt like the truest kind of happy ending Marianne could imagine. Sometimes the worst darkness isn't in the eyes, but in the heart of someone who should be lighting the way. And sometimes healing begins the moment someone brave enough decides that darkness doesn't get the final word, that light, truth, and love are always worth fighting for, no matter how impossible the fight seems. Evelyn Foster was living proof of that. And every morning when she woke up and opened her eyes to see sunlight streaming through her window, she was writing a new ending to a story that had almost destroyed her. An ending that looked like hope. An ending that looked like light. The end. As we close the final chapter of Evelyn's story, I want you to ask yourself something. What would you have done in Marianne's place? Would you have walked away when the threats mounted and your job was on the line? Would you have convinced yourself that some secrets are too dangerous to uncover, that some children are beyond saving? Or would you have done what she did, risk everything for a truth that no one else wanted to see? The power of this story isn't just in what happened to Evelyn Hartmann, but in what it reveals about all of us. About how easy it is to look the other way when confronting darkness feels too costly. About how love can become so twisted by fear and guilt that it transforms into the very prison it claims to protect against. Richard Hartmann believed he was saving his daughter by burying her in darkness. Diana Hartmann believed she was protecting her baby by trying to take away her sight. Both of them loved Evelyn desperately, and both of them nearly destroyed her. This story teaches us that the most dangerous lies aren't the ones told by strangers or enemies. They're the ones told by people who convince themselves that cruelty is kindness, that control is care, that imprisonment is protection. Evelyn survived not because of the people who loved her most, but because one woman loved her enough to tell her the truth, even when that truth was terrifying. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is choose light over comfort, honesty over safety, and trust that the people we're trying to save are stronger than we give them credit for. Now I want to hear from you. What moment in this story affected you most deeply? What would you have done differently? Have you ever had to choose between comfortable silence and difficult truth? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. And if this story moved you, if it made you think or feel or question, then please subscribe to our channel, hit that like button, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Because stories like Evelyn's matter. They remind us that even in the deepest darkness, there's always someone brave enough to turn on the light. Thank you for listening, and until next time, remember, the worst prisons aren't made of bars and walls. They're made of lies we're taught to believe about ourselves.